Okay, welcome to our webinar. Apologies for a slight delay. We had some issues with the link and hopefully you all now have that link. So let's get going. We will crack through our content. Welcome to our webinar. Today, myself, Erica van Lieven, the Managing Partner for InSites Consulting Australia, and my colleague, Matt Jorgensen, one of our directors, will be sharing this really interesting content. In the first part, I'll be talking about how we think about and the frameworks we set up in customer experience. And in the second part of the webinar, Matt will be sharing some detailed cases about how we bring this to life. But it all starts here. Large corporates for a long time have been successful with an inside-out view. It's worked, but in the current environment of speed, innovation, macroeconomic factors, it's a risky strategy. Large corporates are realising they need to move to an outside-in perspective. But just like Copernicus, who finally published his book in 1547, it's a difficult new story to tell. Copernicus faced much criticism when he came up with his revolutionary thinking that the sun was at the centre of the universe. And so large corporates who embark on a journey to have an outside-in perspective need openness, agility, and a strong discipline to stay the course. It's not easy. And so for marketers as well, they need to start and think about how to move from marketing to consumers to mattering to people. It was Havas Media who did research in 2017 that showed that most people would not care if 3 out of 4 brands disappeared. In other words, marketers need to move from an egocentric view of the world, what my product does, into mattering to people, to relevance in people's minds. In the same way for customer experience and programs and insight leaders running customer experience programs. There are many touch points that are managed. They're measured, satisfaction is tracked, it's improved. Surely this gives you a customer-centric view in your company. But I would argue for many, it becomes another inside-out process. Companies need to find a way to take this more to an outside-in process. It's a little bit like fattening your pig. If we keep trotting our pig on and off the scales every day, he's likely to lose weight by just measuring. Tracking is not going to improve the experience. What we need to do is think about understanding the pig's needs and its behaviours in a manner that can allow us to create an environment to fatten our pig. See, the problem is, for many large corporates, a fixed customer experience measurement program doesn't deliver an improving commercial outcome, not in a dynamic and competitive market. So I'm going to focus on the 3 things I think corporates can think about to really try and inject an essence into the program that allows them to really bring the customer to the centre of their business through extreme customer obsession, to build speed into what they're doing, and to inject the all-important creativity. Because these 3 elements are really important to thinking about how you really drive up the experience through your program. I'm going to start talking about extreme customer obsession. Here's an example from eBay, their company Gumtree in the UK. They have a very experienced touchpoint management program. The team every day measure and track customer experience on their website and in their app. They ask us to help them try and improve that customer experience or that touchpoint management. What we did was put their customers on our proprietary square and measure the whole journey. What we found was that Gumtree, when it comes to buying and selling second-hand cars, are extremely good at managing the touch points within their website and their app. The problem was the most important parts of the experience for consumers were outside of that. People buying and selling cars are worried about trusting the seller, and they're worried about the reliability of the car they're buying. Gumtree had too narrow a focus on the touch points in the overall process of the customer's journey to buying a second-hand car. You see, we need to think beyond the touch point to understand the moments of truth in the journey. First of all, what is the moment of truth? This is every step along the journey that a customer or a consumer takes in buying or interacting with your product or service. And we need to think about mapping that, creating a journey map. Here is another example from an airline, in this instance KLM. KLM wanted to improve its international transfer experience. We put a large group of international frequent flyers onto our square to understand what was going on in that overall transfer experience. What we found was really interesting. What we found is that whilst KLM was focused on the touch points within the international airport, airline transfer experience starts a long time before that. In fact, what we found is it starts on the plane before you approach your destination. So let's think about this. Here's a simplified map of the customer journey. And here we've mapped each of the moments in the international journey. We book, we prepare, we get to the airport, we depart, we're in flight, and we transfer. Now, a lot of things happen with our consumer or customer in this process. Here we have the things that they do. But importantly, there's how they feel about each one of those moments in the journey. By putting our international travellers on the square and connecting them through that whole journey, we understood that many of them were extremely nervous on the plane before they landed, trying to understand how to make their in-flight transfer at the airport. What we learned is that KLM already had touchpoint management in place in the airport, but completely missed the very important and quite emotional moment in the flight. They needed to add more moments and communication in the journey to really smooth it for their customers. So here we're talking about the first level of becoming consumer-centric, moving from a narrow touchpoint focus into thinking about the moments, all of the moments in the journey, and remembering that not all moments are equal. Some are more important than others. And then we need to think about the famous Professor Theodore Levitt from Harvard University, who's famously said, people don't want to buy a 3/4 inch drill. What they want, in fact, is a hole in the wall. Or they want memories from their last holiday to remember fondly the wonderful times they had. You see, we need to get beyond the product or service and think about the need. What is the consumer need? What is the job to be done? The jobs to be done framework allows us to move from a simple product or service offer into understanding all the underlying needs. So here we start to think about moving from a solution, the drill, to what is the consumer need? How do I meet that consumer? Here's another example from one of the biggest travel operators in Europe, Tooey. Tooey had in place a very well-oiled, mature customer satisfaction measurement within their business. They were internally aligned, they were aligned with their partners and their suppliers, but what they noticed was that a mature management of their customer service was no longer moving the commercial dial. It wasn't giving them better customer satisfaction, it wasn't giving them better commercial outcomes, and it wasn't making them more competitive. So they stepped back from this and tried to understand what are the needs that our consumers have when they're seeking to book a travel experience with us. What they did was build a customer experience management program where they seek to do 3 things. Support me to make the right choices when I travel, keep me excited and looking forward to my journey, and help me stay in a holiday mood after the journey. By embedding this kind of customer experience program within the business, they were able to really start and move both their customer satisfaction levels, but more importantly, commercial outcomes. You see, we really all need to start and realise that people are only consumers for a small amount of the day. After that, they're just people. We need to think about moving from the narrow constraint of the time and the context of our customer experience into understanding how we can build experiences that matter in consumers' lives. Here's another airline example. In this instance, travel company, KLM again. Airlines typically very focused on efficiency. How do we do check-in faster? How do we smooth people through international transfer? How do we get people onto the plane more efficiently? In this instance, they connected with what are international travellers seeking in their journey? Well, most people go on an international journey to experience new cultures and learn new things. By connecting with this, they were able to build a really out-of-the-box experience for the international travellers. They set up an app for people who were stopping over at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam for 6 hours or more. Before starting their journey, these customers can check into the app saying they would like a buddy or a layover with a local whilst they have their 6-hour layover. Whilst they're flying to Schiphol, the app allows KLM to connect them with a local buddy. On arrival at the international airport, the app provides them with a free train ticket to get into the centre of Amsterdam, to meet with their available buddy and have, through the app, a free drink or two whilst they connect and learn about Amsterdam and the experience and culture of that city. Again, the app then provides a ticket back to the airport and notifies the transferring traveller when is a good time to leave the time with their buddy in order to make the international transfer. See, this is all about moving from just saying what I'm going to do for you as a brand into really having a purpose in people's lives. And the best example I really have for this one is one you all know. It's the Wikipedians versus Microsoft Encarta. Microsoft Encarta, with paid professionals, set out to build the most amazing online encyclopedia ever available. At the same time, passionate Wikipedians set out to create information and make it free by connecting with people and filling that information to make it available to anyone. We all know who won. In 2009, Microsoft turned off their Encarta, completely defeated by the passion and the focus of those who were doing it for a purpose. And large FMC brands are also moving in this direction. Unilever, one of the largest globally, is slowly rolling out each of its brands to have a purpose. Omo, for instance, is encouraging its consumers to get their children out to play and experience life through play, whatever life throws at you. In fact, the research, again, from Habits Media shows that brands that move to purpose have steeper and more profitable growth. You see, this is where brands start just saying what they do into having a real purpose in people's lives. And this 3 levels of customer centricity is what we really think corporates need to think about. Move from a narrow touchpoint focus into understanding the moments, all of the moments in the journey, knowing that some moments are more important than others. Move from just thinking about your solution to understanding what are the consumer needs within this framework. And for brands, stop telling us about what you do, but start to provide relevant experiences that add to my life. This is the kind of customer centricity we need to be building into our services and products. But this customer centricity on its own is not enough. We need to add to this, of course, extreme speed. And this is not something I need to remind you of. Everybody is struggling with the pressure and speed of change externally and trying to find ways to keep up with this internally. And we all know this is going to increase. How do we do this? I think it's important to move beyond agility, which is just thought of as something fast and cheap, to delivering agility into a business that allows for iterative insighting, deep insighting work, and smart ongoing co-creation with relevant consumers. Here's an example we did for Bosch. A 2-week challenge to co-create and validate a totally new power tool, which was achieved by galvanising an internal team focused on the outcome around an external group of consumers on a square where overnight iterations were allowed, a 2-week pressure cooker from start to finish, building a totally new power tool, connecting first, making sure the insight was right, feeding it back the next day to the team, then checking that the wording of the insight and the concept is correct, overnight with consumers, back to the team, and finally making sure that it delivered to what customers and consumers were expecting. This is indeed agility, but quality agility at scale. The next thing we have to think about is how we get creativity, one of the hardest things of all, especially when we have an inside-out perspective. Jesper Kundal was absolutely right, and here is a wonderful example. How many of you ever see a difference in a bottle of water that you buy in a convenience store or supermarket? They're all blue, they're all clear, and they're all water. And I've seen this so many times. A well-built inside-out focus by a company will go through a well-worked process. It's a best practice that many companies use, and often it arrives at the same insight, the same idea, and the internal view necessarily brings it to the same thinking. How do we inject creativity into that? Well, somehow you've got to find a way of bringing a fresh perspective from outside, something that is very hard to get into a large team. Finding a way of using your insider knowledge and leveraging intelligent naivety through creativity into that. I like to think about it this way. With the hundreds of squares and connections we have with consumers in the air all the time, we know that 90% of consumers can validate ideas. They'll tell you if they like it. They'll tell you if they'll buy it. They'll tell you if it's relevant. But they will very, very rarely come up with a really groundbreaking idea for you. You and I, we're like the 9% who can curate. We take ideas and concepts. We know how to build platforms from that. We know how to leverage it into something that's better. But the truly creative, those people who are creatives in ad agencies, designers, out-of-the-box thinkers, they're often that 1%. And we need to find ways, and we do it through creative crowdsourcing, to inject them into our process. What we see that's really interesting in this space is often the best ideas come from somewhere else. And here you can see, using our crowdsourcing approach, that it was a Chinese fellow who came up with the mini Oreo for Europe, and it was Nick Willis in the USA who came up with the TVC for the launch of a drink in India. It's that outside-in perspective that often adds that next layer that is very hard to come up with internally in your internal ideation workshops. We do it through global ideation contests. On our proprietary ICA platform, we connect with the 1% self-selected creatives. With a good brief built off good insights, we submit them onto the platform, and they come up with well-articulated and illustrated ideas. Typically, once we brief, it's 2 weeks to get the ideas. We get 40 to 100 fresh ideas, frequently illustrated, and what we find is that they outperform concepts from a more traditional process, just by checking in with that different outside perspective of that creative 1%. Here's a great example that comes out of the work with ICA. This is Procter Gamble thinking, the R&D team thinking, how do we launch, what do we do with an electrical toothbrush that can connect? The challenge put to the ICA crowd was, tell us what an electrical toothbrush could do that can connect to the internet to offer to change your life for the better. Well, the answers they got for the R&D team were quite groundbreaking. The ideas had 3 kind of platforms: teach me how to do it better, make it more fun, give me feedback on what I'm doing, and personalise it for me, cleaning for me. It wasn't just the ideas on how to launch the Oral-B toothbrush, it was also the thinking that helped the R&D team at Procter & Gamble understand that connectivity was the new vector for them in innovation. So these three things are extremely important to inject into our process, being very extreme about building in 3 layers of customer obsession, adding speed and quality agility to the process, and then injecting creativity, trying to get that outside-in perspective on what we do. In this next part of our webinar, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matt, who's going to share with you through 2 great case studies how we've taken this approach, firstly in building journey strategy and experience development, injecting the crowd, and secondly, how to really step up the in-market testing and really deliver breakthrough customer experience programs. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Erica. The case I'm going to talk you through the first case I'm going to talk you through today is a piece that we did for Volkswagen. Volkswagen, like many European manufacturers, are facing some very tough competition from entrants from Asia, the likes of Toyota, Kia, and so on. And in a market that's becoming more and more homogeneous, they're looking for new ways to differentiate. And so the opportunity for Volkswagen was to revisit their pre, during, and post-sales experience, really to understand each of those consumer moments throughout that journey, what opportunities there were to really unlock untapped potential and to revamp it, to really create a different and differentiated experience from what their competitors were offering. This was a 3-year program that we ran with Volkswagen, and when it kicked off, one of the things that we built around this program was we established an online community of consumers who had both recently bought a car, but also those who were active in the market. This online community was facilitated on our platform, the Consumer Consulting Square, which is an online bespoke community platform that brings together interested and interested people to engage and discuss with the moderator. This was moderated in local language, using surveys, ethnographic techniques, blogging, a whole range of different approaches, and we had 200 consumers on the platform. One of the other this piece of work was to really to inject impact throughout the business. So it wasn't just enough to bring the insights to the business, we really needed to generate change in the organisation. One way we did this was by facilitating an online engagement internally through our InSites Activation Studio platform. And this was a central hub for insights and learnings as the project developed, but also a place for people to share their insights and learnings from workshops for those who potentially were unable to attend or in other locations, but also a place where team tasks, competitions and activities could take place when we get to things such as idea screening and ideation later on. So the first part of the program, we really set out to harvest and scope what we knew already. So Volkswagen have a very well-oiled machine in terms of their insights function. They already had a lot of knowledge about what it was to be a consumer buying a car today. So we went back through existing research. We also went out and spoke to dealers, and we looked at desk research through trend reports, industry reports, really tried to get under the skin of what was really happening at the moment. And again, this data and information and insight was all really shared internally across the InSites Activation Studio. Once we'd actually established where we were sitting, it was then over to consumers to start to help us to map the journey. And this is where we brought in the Consumer Consulting Square. The Square itself was not just a Q&A forum, it was a facility that allowed us to basically see behaviour and then observe how that behaviour played out. So we used a range of different tools and different techniques, not only to initiate discussions between consumers and the moderator, but we also asked them to go on missions and complete certain tasks. So for example, we sent consumers out on mystery shopping expeditions to be a consumer and bring back videos and content from their experiences to talk about the interaction they had with the dealer or with a salesperson. We asked them to be our on-the-ground reporters, reporting back on things they had spotted out and about in terms of news and content that related to Volkswagen or the broader automotive industry relating to customer experience. And we also got them to talk about their best and worst experiences, not only from customer experience in automotive, but also more broadly speaking, because we really wanted to start to get underneath the broader underlying consumer needs when it comes to purchasing a car. From there, once we had conducted our initial 3-week deep dive exploration as consumers and brought together our industry findings, we started to map the overall journey. And where this started was by basically identifying 10 overarching needs that consumers have when they were purchasing a car. And as you can see, these needs were quite generic, they were quite broad, and that was basically the intention here was really to try and get underneath the very kind of basic fundamental needs that people have. Everything from transparency and guidance through to trust, excitement, empowerment, and personalisation. And these started to form the foundations of our jobs to be done, which are the key moments that we have as an opportunity for Volkswagen to engage and also to optimise the experience for the customer. Through this, we identified 26 jobs to be done throughout the overall journey, and we mapped them using the McKinsey loyalty loop to classify them into different stages of the customer journey. And we identified each of these jobs to be done, but also recognised that this was our opportunity to optimise or to improve or to basically have a significant role in shaping the overall customer experience. For each of those jobs to be done, recognising that there were 26, we needed to prioritise them. So the next phase was really about getting people across the detail of each of those in terms of providing them granular information around what each of those jobs to be done looked like, identifying primary, secondary needs, frictions, aspirations, etc., so that everyone was really clear about what each of those jobs to be done actually meant from a consumer perspective. When it came to prioritisation, we moved into a quantitative methodology to ask consumers to help us to rate these jobs to be done. So we wanted to understand which ones were most important from a consumer perspective. We also wanted to know which ones Volkswagen performed well on already or had an opportunity to improve, but we also wanted to understand where the opportunity for business impact actually lied as well. And this matrix allowed us to really start to understand where our focus should start to lie. Taking all of these insights together, we also then were able to look at some of those key moments and start to map the consumer experience through that moment. So in this particular instance, I want to be informed about the cars that I'm purchasing. We were able to create an emotional curve that identified the peaks and troughs of the emotional experience that a consumer was having throughout that journey. Why this was important is because this starts to really leverage up to tell us where the opportunity really lies in terms of ideation, in terms of identifying very specific friction points on the journey where consumers might experience uncertainty, anxiety, or frustration. From there, we moved into a strategization and prioritization phase with the Volkswagen stakeholders. And this took the form of a workshop where we spent 2 days with them working through the overall outputs, but also getting them across where they really felt that they had the strongest opportunity for change and impact. The way that we facilitated this was through a gamification exercise where we asked people to place their bets on a roulette wheel in terms of the overall customer journey. And from that, we facilitated a discussion and a healthy debate about where their focus should actually lie. During that exercise, we were able to get to a space where everyone was comfortable that we would focus on the first 2 phases of the customer journey, the consideration and deal phase as a first priority. And they would become a priority for the first year, with the subsequent phases falling into the next year. Now, the reason why they wanted to focus on those 2 early phases of the journey were because, first of all, it gave them the greatest opportunity to drive business results by improving the pre-sale experience. It had the strongest potential to actually generate a return in terms of increased sales. But also it was the area they felt that it was probably easier for them to have stronger influence. So there was more to be done in that space that they felt they could address through revisiting new potential customer touch points. The way Volkswagen managed this prioritization is internally their management team ensured that budget would only be allocated for initiatives that fell under those 2 umbrellas, and everything else would be pushed into a later date. So once we actually mapped the journey and agreed where we wanted to take things, it was then really about activating that journey. And this is where we wanted our key stakeholders in the business to actually become consumers and actually experience some of those frustrations and low points of that journey themselves. So using our InSites Activation Studio, we put up a number of competitions and challenges for stakeholders to go out and actually play a consumer in the real world. We sent them into dealerships where they would pretend to be a consumer and experience the highs and lows and frustrations that our consumers have given us their insights around on the community. We also sent them into a number of online spaces as well, where they would be forced to explore and try and get to grips with information that might be on their own website and competitor websites, to also understand a little bit about how just challenging it can be to find the information you're looking for. So each of those gamified tasks were put out to a range of stakeholders, and their insights and experiences were shared on the platform, where their colleagues and colleagues were encouraged to comment and discuss their experiences. From there, it really then came down to ideation to solve some of those frictional points. And Volkswagen were quite strong in their point of view that they felt they would be able to deliver some very out-of-the-box thinking from what they had received from consumers and from what they believed they could develop themselves internally. After an initial round of internal ideation, it was very clear that they were not getting the traction that they wanted, and to be honest, the results that we were seeing come through were not really going to cut it. So what we proposed was to actually take this initiative out to our creative crowdsourcing group, the IPA community, and brief them to actually come up with some solutions to some common frictional points that we had identified through the customer journey. So in terms of the different ideas that we received, from our consumers, we managed to achieve 85 ideas that were generated from consumer discussions and ideation. And these were typically quite quick wins. They were kind of simple things that resolved friction points that consumers had experienced themselves, and kind of the low-hanging fruit that would have just achieved some very quick wins, but probably weren't going to really revolutionize the overall experience in the way that Volkswagen had hoped. It's 11 ideas, only 11 from our internal ideation. This was due to the fact that there was a lot of discussion happening internally about things that had been tried before and who would own certain things. So there was quite a lot of ideas tend to get shut down by that type of discussion. So we found that only about 11 ideas came out of it. And to be honest, most of those ideas were things that had been brought to market in the past and tried and certainly were being refreshed, or they were things that they had spotted from competitors that they felt that they could bring to the market. From our creative crowdsourcing, we got 70 ideas, and these ideas were quite unique in the sense that they were quite out of the box. They were quite different from the low-hanging fruit that our consumers gave to us in terms of their simple everyday frustrations they wanted to have fixed. And they were also quite different in the sense that they weren't things that the Volkswagen stakeholders had seen tried before, either by themselves or had seen other things that competitors had rolled out. They were really quite unique and creative and kind of out there ideas. Some examples of some of the ideas that we brought into this discussion. We had one idea which was an initiative about purchase a new Volkswagen and receive shares in the company. So not only do you own a Volkswagen, but you become an owner of Volkswagen. We had another initiative which was about a test drive. So a number of consumers reported to us that their test drive experience was not the same as owning the car. It was quite an artificial experience, and they wanted something along the lines where they could take the car home for a weekend and experience what it would like to actually own the car in their day-to-day lives. And another one was we had this idea of a Volkswagen concierge, which was an online platform who would facilitate a home or office pickup and drop off of your car when it needed to be serviced. So where these ideas came from, the idea for new car owners becoming owners of Volkswagen in terms of becoming shareholders was one of the ideas that our creative crowdsourcing community brought to the discussion. This drive solution came from our consumers because this was something that they had experienced and reported back. It was a simple frustration that they felt that Volkswagen could quite easily address. And then lastly, the internal ideation brought us the Volkswagen concierge, because this is something that a number of other competitors had rolled out, and Volkswagen felt that they should come to the market with something of a similar vein. So as you can see, the crowdsourcing idea here really kind of started to elicit some really outside the box thinking. And out of this whole experience, it was then to take it into an ideation workshop where we needed to start working with the internal stakeholders about prioritization, reshaping things. And in the first day, we worked with them to basically download all of the ideas that we had to date. And then overnight, we took those ideas into an idea screening phase where consumers on our consumer consulting square screened the ideas overnight for us. And at the same time on the activation studio, an internal screening happened with Volkswagen stakeholders who basically allowed us to see not only which ideas have the strongest appeal from consumers, but also where the strongest internal appetite for change might lie. And so using those two pieces of knowledge, we came in on the second day of the workshop to start to bring the insights together and focus around where the priorities of ideation and innovation really should lie. From there, it was then to an iterative concept testing phase where those key ideas were chosen, were then taken into a concept test where teams were assigned to work on those concepts. They were given access to the consumer consulting square to be able to test the ideas, take the learnings in, iterate, go back, retest ideas and reshape things. They also were then encouraged to share their knowledge and what they were learning on the InSites Activation Studio so that other people in the process could share their feedback and thinking along the way as well internally within Volkswagen. The many ideas that we took, there were over 200 ideas that came from the overall exercise. We needed to then start to really think about what are the key ones overall. And so from there we had 11 overall ideas that were taken into the concept testing phase. And these were the ideas that were put to the community to work with over the coming months to shape those. From those 11 ideas, they were then taken into a live prototype phase, which is currently underway with Volkswagen, where they have a number of facilities in various markets around the world where these ideas are brought to life in prototype form and where real consumers can come in and experience them before they're actually taken to a broader market and expanded across the broader Volkswagen network. So in terms of our experience working with Volkswagen, as I said, this was a very long 3-year program, and I've really just taken you through the first year. In subsequent years, we've had a number of iterations of this program where it's evolved and changed, but it gives you a bit of an idea, of at least a solid flavour of our approach to understanding consumer experience and recognising that we're not just talking about existing touch points, but we really believe that the best customer experience program is under the skin of what the consumer really needs and what are the opportunities for the brand to actually make a difference, and identifying these as our jobs to be done in terms of where the brand can actually reshape those consumer experiences. And we really start that by harvesting what we know, mapping the journey in detail, activating that journey internally and getting people on board before we move it into an ideation phase and then into a concept and experience development phase. From there, the next phase obviously is then about evaluation and then tracking the overall in-market response. And it's really to bring these phases to life, I want to talk you through another case which is related to a completely different sector related to the travel industry. So in terms of in-market evaluation and experience tracking, we run a program with SkyTeam. The SkyTeam is a global alliance of airlines around the world. There are 20 airline partners who are members, and they operate a network of lounges and loyalty privileges for guests travelling on these airlines across the globe. SkyTeam operate within their program a high tier program called SkyPriority, which you can think of a little bit like as your gold or platinum frequent flyers within the SkyPriority program. And each of those passengers is passing through over 1,000 airports every year across 20 different airlines, representing about 50 million people. And in terms of the touch points across the program, SkyPriority are very conscious that there are various points along that journey where the consumer is entering an airport, they're checking in for flights, they're going through security, transiting in various terminals, etc., collecting luggage and so on. So lots of different opportunities and touch points along the way, and really felt that there was a very important need to really start to understand how consumers experienced those journeys, but also more than just listening to the data and understanding what the scores look like, but understanding beyond that and starting to unpick the why behind it. So when we started working with SkyPriority back in 2012, we set up a bespoke community on our Square platform, which was a closed community of travellers built out of their SkyPriority high-tier frequent flyers. So the reason obviously they're focusing on these consumers as they represent only a small proportion of the overall passenger volume, but they do represent a significant proportion in terms of revenue for the member airlines. So these consumers were chosen and asked to become members of a bespoke community, and they were asked to rate their experience at key points along the journey. The way we did this is we geo-fenced airline lounges around the world, and every time a member enters an airport who's part of the community, they receive a push notification to rate their experience on key points of their journey through that airport. So beyond just asking questions, the platform also allowed us to explore or add more further detail to that by adding things like pictures and moments throughout their journey through the airport to bring it to life. So they really wanted to go just from simply asking simple survey questions into really listening to what consumers had to say. We're able to link this up in terms of just looking, rather than looking at touch points, but looking at journeys. Because we knew the consumer who they were, and because we were able to manage the geofencing technology, we were able to map their journey from one airport to the next. So somebody transiting or leaving from JFK in New York, traveling to Seoul via Amsterdam, we would be able to map their experience for a consumer on that journey, engaging at those key points along the way. And the last key component of this was really about generating impact. So, of course, we were able to report back the key findings in terms of the numbers, but it was really about providing not only numbers and reporting, but also providing impact in terms of the why behind it. So consumers are encouraged to upload photographs of their experience, but also importantly to create impact by uploading photos and reporting experiences when things haven't gone quite right. So for example, a passenger walking into an airport lounge and they spot that somebody has spilled some coffee or something on the floor, they can take a photo of that, upload it to the platform and flag it for attention, and the local lounge manager will be alerted that they need to address it. These reports and the dashboards of scores are reported live and cascaded from a local level up to regional, and also reported at a global level. And if you ever go into the SkyTeam head office in New York, you'll see the dashboard sitting on screen in their foyer for everyone to see. So this program was really designed to not only just generate a measurement experience in terms of understanding how consumers experience the SkyPriority program, but it was also about generating impact in the business and acting as a catalyst for change. Because we really believe that if you're only reporting the numbers and not driving change through the business, you're only really delivering half of the job. So overall, what we've taken you through today, from Erica's conversation earlier about exploring the detail around our beliefs and philosophies around measuring and developing consumer experiences, that it's not just about measuring, but it's really importantly, and most importantly, about ensuring that the customer experience program we have in place is really delivering to the overall consumer need from the beginning. To recap in terms of our key 3 success factors, we believe it's really about having an extreme consumer obsession, being really clear about what your customer wants and what they need, and delivering to make sure that you can deliver to that with speed and scale to make sure those needs are met. But also importantly, it's important that you're coming to the market with things that are outside the box, new and different, to not only help create a better customer experience, but using that experience as a point of differentiation. That's up everything we've got for today. If you have entered any questions in the Q&A along the way, we'll take a look at those now. But if you haven't yet mentioned any questions, the floor is open, and please type them into the Q&A box that you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. I don't think we've had any questions at this stage. If there are any questions that you do have or would like to ask us following this webinar and don't get the chance to do so right now, we will leave our contact details at the back end of this. You can obviously reach out by email or phone to ask us anything that you might want to discuss. In that case, as I said, thank you so much for joining us. We do have an article coming out in the AMSRS in the next month or so, which is focused around our beliefs and philosophies around consumer experience. And you'll see there it's really focused around why customer experience is not just a pig weighing exercise. So look out for that in the AMSRS magazine. And if there's anything you'd like to follow up with afterwards, we'd love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to reach out via email or via phone. Thanks so much.